Well, good morning, whoever you are, wherever you find yourself on life's journey, however and whenever you're joining us, you're welcome to this time of worship. We're gathered together to remember the Lord today, to focus on this one who loves us. And in times like these, it's important to remember that God's love hasn't changed. There's still need for different kinds of adjustments. The news this week is telling us that, again, that's in play for us. But God's love is steady. God gives us what we need to manage the stamina, the patience, the grace. And coming together in a time like this for worship is a good way to remind ourselves and one another of that. It's a good way for us to recenter our thinking, to pull away and sit in the presence of the Lord. And so I invite you now to take a breath and be here for this time of worship. Let's trust that the Lord has something for us in these moments together. Amen. Let's pray. Gracious and loving God, thank you for your goodness and grace. Thank you that you are steady and dependable. Thanks that we can keep calling out to you and know that you hear us. And now as we are together in all different places for this purpose of worship, God, meet us here. Speak to us in ways we can understand. Draw us closer to you, we ask. Through Christ, gracious and risen Lord. Amen.
St. Thomas. We are happy to be in worship with you. And as Dan said earlier today, wherever we are and wherever we are watching this at the time, God is there. We can surely feel his presence here in the sanctuary, and I trust that as we go through worship this morning, that you would feel his presence as well. Singing glory, glory, let there be peace, let there be peace. Singing glory, glory, let there be peace, let it start in me.
You stepped down from heaven, humbly you came, God of all creation, here with us. In a starry manger, Emmanuel, Light of the world, here to save. Adore, come let us adore. Oh, come let us adore Him, the Lord. Worship Christ the Lord. Let all that is within us adore. Wise men bring their treasures, shepherds bow low, angel voices sing of peace on earth. What have I to offer to heaven's King? I will bring my life, my love, my all. Angels sing, praises ring to the newborn King. Peace on earth here with us, joy awakening. At your feet we fall. Angels sing, praises ring to the newborn King. Peace on earth here with us, joy awakening. At your feet we fall. Adore, come let us adore. Oh, come let us adore Him, the Lord. Worship Christ the Lord. Let all that is within us adore.
Such a good word there, adore. Adore calls for concentration and for focus, and that's important to us in a time when it's so easy to get distracted. There's so much going on, especially this time of year. So many different ways for us to give our attention out. I was driving up to the church building this morning for our services, and as I'm driving along the highway, I hear the car behind me blowing his horn, and I'm thinking, what's that all about? And wondering what's going on around me, and I realized suddenly he's honking at me because I'm starting to drift into the lane that he wanted to occupy. And I thought, well, that's a good warning. I appreciate the focus, the encouragement to focus from that, and I realized I wasn't trying to drift, but there it was. And we lose track sometimes. When we come together and worship, it's an opportunity for us to focus our minds and our hearts on the one that we say we adore. To consider this one who has given himself for us, this one who loves us, this one who calls us into service. And so as we spend these next moments in prayer, let's remember again this God, this one we worship, this one we adore, this one who wants to capture and hold our attention as we move through our days. Let's pray together. Loving and gracious God, thank you that you're always available, that we can always look to you, that we are not bothering you when we pray, that we are not taking you away from something more important, that we are not with the many voices that are lifted to you, creating confusion, but that you hear us all, that you welcome each one of us. And so we come, God, confident in our prayers, lifting before you the needs that we're aware of, people that we care about, people who have experienced loss recently, people who are sick or who have friends and loved ones who are sick, people who are dealing with financial setbacks, people who are struggling through relationships, people who are having to deal with uncharted waters at work. God, we ask that you'd be moving, bringing wisdom and patience and healing, stamina, grace. That your people would move through their days full of love and able to offer that in the situations they're part of. That you would be at work in these areas of need. That you would be laying into our hearts ways that we can help. We thank you, God, for who you are, for what you give, for what you do, for what you make possible. We thank you that you hear us as we come in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, this Advent season, we have been looking at this matter of incarnation, that fancy word that theologians use to talk about God putting on skin. John the Apostle, one of Jesus' first 12 disciples, was intrigued by this idea, and he opens the gospel that he writes with some thoughts about the incarnation of Jesus. For instance, he talks about Jesus taking on flesh and dwelling among us. How Jesus had the experience of what it was like to be human, how Jesus shows us what is possible for humans. John, like other gospel writers, also wants to tell us about another aspect of the incarnation, namely this, that Jesus shows us not just what humans can be like, but what God is like. In Jesus, we see God's interests and character, God's aims and commitments, God's values being played out in ways that we can perceive and understand. The Apostle Paul was also interested in the incarnation, and he'll write about this from different angles in the letters that he offers to friends. One of those is in the book of Philippians, written to a group that was living in the northern part of Greece. And I want to read a few verses out of chapter 2 of Philippians, where Paul is speaking about that incarnation. He does this because he wants to talk to people who are living at a time when they might have some questions about what God is up to, what God is after. The people in this town, like other places that Paul knew about, were serious about following God. They were also facing challenges. There were pressures from those who didn't share their same allegiance to or alignment with Christ. And then there was the friction that came from being together with others who were followers of Jesus, who still, when they get together, things happen, right? And frictions emerge as you're trying to figure out what it means to be the church. And so Paul writes to these people, and he wants to help them in both of these areas of challenge. The way he does that is by pointing them to Jesus, who, he says in chapter 2 and verse 6, precisely because he was in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant and being made in human likeness. So that's the picture that Paul gives us of Jesus. And in these words, he is describing the incarnation, the taking on of flesh by God, Jesus becoming human. Now, what stands out for Paul is the way that this incarnation demonstrates humility. Jesus hadn't come as a powerful king, but rather as one who was committed to serving. There was no person Jesus wouldn't care for. There was no task Jesus wouldn't take on. Now, if you pull back for a moment and think about this, you realize what a surprise this description is. And think, for instance, about the people around you and the way they talk and think about God. What do you hear? What's demonstrated in the conversations, the books and the movies that we take part in? Very often, God is seen as angry, ready to pounce, looking for an excuse to beat on someone. God is random, helps some and not others. Or God is irrelevant. Have you noticed how many stories get told without any mention of God whatsoever? The idea of God as a servant, well, if that shows up, it tends to be more in the case of, well, yeah, I want God to serve me. I want to get that good parking place. I want help with a test that I have to take that maybe I didn't study for quite enough. That's how God serves. Things that are going to help me. Well, if we go back to Paul's day, we would find that people had different kinds of ideas about God as well, and gods. I mean, Paul's writing to people living in Greece. And if you remember back to your days of world history, one of the categories, one of the subjects we would study would be the Greek gods, the Greek mythology. Apollo, and Zeus, and Athena, and Ares, and figures like that. This pantheon of gods and goddesses that people knew about, worshipped, sacrificed, who built temples for. The city of Philippi would have had temples in it to these Greek gods. These beings who are manipulative and mercurial and manic and mean. When you think about God, it's in those kinds of terms. Now, among Jews, it was a slightly different story, perhaps significantly different in that because they had the scriptures. But as we read in the Gospels and even in the epistles, there was a tendency, at least among some, to be selective in their reading of the scriptures and come up with a view of God as a conqueror, as one who very much played favorites. And yet here is Paul, offering a very different view, noticing how God is humble, how God serves, how God is willing, even eager, to pour himself out for all, to endure hardships for the sake of others. The God Paul talks about is a God who is with us, a God who is for us. It's quite different from an angry, distant, brutal God. The picture that Paul presents is hopeful. It's energizing. He knows about a God who understands, a God who cares, a God who steps in to help to do whatever is necessary. And what's necessary? Well, people are captive to sin. They are broken in different ways, and so what's necessary is for the Lord to come and to be obedient all the way to death. This is verse 8 of Philippians 2. Become obedient to death, even death on a cross. And the death that Paul is describing there is one that overcomes the power of sin and frees the captives. It's a death that opens a door into life in a community where restoration is possible. A community that owes its existence to a servant. Now let's pause here for a minute or two and consider, as we think about this incarnation, what has God shown by taking on flesh? What has God shown? What has God done by taking on flesh? And as we mull that over, then other questions emerge as well. How does this affect us? How does this incarnation touch our lives? Think about this community that Jesus' incarnation, which takes him to the cross, this community that is possible because of Jesus' humble obedience. To what degree is this community shaped by its founder? To what extent are the members of this community shaped by their founder? At Christmas, we see Jesus, the little baby, lying in the manger, but when we start to open that up a little more and consider God taking on flesh, this incarnation, so much moves out of that. When we hear Paul talking about the Lord as a servant, it's very easy for our thoughts to shift to this table where Jesus gathered with his friends just before he would go to the cross and talk with them about what was ahead, what was going to happen to him, and what would be true for them because of that. Just before the meal, we read, and it's John who captures this scene, that Jesus goes into the room and is waiting for his disciples as they arrive. He takes up a basin and a towel, the tools of a servant, to wash their feet. That's how this meal begins. And Jesus says to them in the course of that the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. That sets the context for the meal that follows, where Jesus will pick bread up from the table, give thanks, he'll break it, he'll pass it among his friends, and he'll talk about his body broken for them. There's a cup on the table, and he'll take that as well and say, in this, you see the blood, my blood, poured out for the forgiveness of sins. Jesus will go to the cross in obedience to the Father and give himself there for the good of humanity. As we remember the Lord this morning, through the eating and the drinking, may we be mindful once more of this one who serves. Loving and gracious God, thank you for this bread and for this cup, for the way they speak of your sacrifice, of your service, of your willingness to pour yourself out for us. Praise be to your holy name. As we eat this bread, we remember the Lord. As we drink this cup, we see the one who serves. Amen.
Holy, you are still holy, even when the darkness surrounds my life. Sovereign, you are still sovereign, even when confusion has blinded my eyes. Lord, I don't deserve your kind affection. When my unbelief has kept me from your touch, I want my life to be a pure reflection of your love. And so I come into your chambers and I dance at your feet, Lord. You are my Savior and I'm at
belongs to you, for you are still holy. Holy, you are still holy, even when the darkness surrounds my life. Sovereign, you are still sovereign, even when confusion has blinded my eyes. Lord, I don't deserve your kind affection. When my unbelief has kept me from your touch, I want my life to be a pure reflection of your love. And so I come into your chambers and I dance at your feet, Lord. You are my Savior and I'm at your mercy. All that has been in my life up to now belongs to you, for you are still holy.
Messiah, name above all names, blessed Redeemer, Emmanuel, the rescue from sinners, the ransom from heaven, Jesus Messiah, Lord of all.
A lot of powerful ideas in that song. Ransom from heaven, blessed Redeemer, Lord of all, Emmanuel, God with us. Well, we're in a room that has been brightened this week by poinsettias, thanks to those who have shared these donations with us for a couple more weeks. Back in our kitchen, people have been assembling plates of cookies that were baked by others, and they'll go to shut-ins and others. Things are happening even though we don't meet here on a Sunday morning. The work of the church continues. If you have some needs, you're aware of some needs, please give the office a call and we'll see what we can do to help with that. And we've already had some requests that call for a little bit of additional assistance with driving, with preparing meals. If you want to take part in that, you can contact Carol in the office as well, and she'll direct you to the right people for that. Well, we keep moving through these days, waiting and waiting for things to change. I was reflecting this week on how often waiting is a part of the story of people in the scriptures. Abraham waited for a child. Daniel waited all night in the den of lions. The children of Israel waited in Babylon for an exile to come to an end. Elizabeth, Mary, they waited for babies. The Apostle Paul waited and waited and waited in jail cells. There's hardly a story in our Bible that doesn't involve waiting of one kind or another. Let's keep trusting the Lord as we go through these days that sometimes feel pretty long. Let's trust that God is with us, that God has what we need to make it through these days well, to realize that we're not on hold during this time of waiting. There are things to do. God's given us resources. God gives us ideas. And God calls us to serve even as God has served. So let's move into these days. Let's move through these days with grace, in love, with real confidence. And God is with us. God has all we need to make it through well. Rest in that. Move with that. Today, tomorrow, and as many days as God gives.